All right, so now we're going to start talking about bone remodeling. So bone remodeling is going to involve both bone formation or bone formation and removal. Okay, so in order to remodel something, you're going to have to kind of take away things, but also put things back. Okay, now some interesting kind of facts or statistics about bone remodeling. So in the human body, kind of the average bone remodeling, or you can almost think about it as replacement bone, is about 5 to 10%. So this is remodeling per year. And then what that means is that every 10 years, you basically have replaced your entire skeleton. Entire skeleton. Okay, so again, just think about how dynamic the bone really is. Okay, so this is going to be something that is constantly being remodeled, and bone is being formed and removed. Okay, it kind of depends on the type of bone. So the 10 years, that's mostly going to be the compact bone. The spongy bone is going to be replaced every 3 to 4 years. Spongy bone. Okay. Now this is really important because what happens is the calcium salts that are important for creating these very strong bones, they tend to start to crystallize and become brittle, and so we have to constantly replace it. Okay, so it's important to have this replacement happening, otherwise we would start having more fractures and things like that happening. Okay, now in adults, okay, bone is going to be deposited and removed primarily at the endosteal surface, so that's going to be on the inside. So bone is deposited and removed primarily at the endosteal surface. Okay, so that's gonna be the inner cavity. When we have bone remodeling taking place, it is going to involve coordination of both osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Okay, and so osteoblasts obviously are going to be part of the depositing of the new bone material, and then osteoclasts are going to be removing bone material. Okay, both of these are going to respond to signals from hormones and from, we have stress sensing osteocytes. Oh geez, osteocytes. Okay, and we'll talk about kind of how that happens. One thing is that remodeling does not occur uniformly. So different parts of the bones will remodel at different rates and at different times. Okay, so when we're talking about bone remodeling, we have to talk about bone resorption. So resorbing all of the different parts. Okay, and so this is going to be mainly a job of the osteoclasts. Okay, the osteoclasts are going to move along the bone surface. Okay, and when they are at an area that needs to be start to be broken down, their ruffled border. So remember, they have that ruffled border, that's really important, clings tightly to the bone, and this is really important, So it seals off the area of bone destruction, which is important because you don't want bone that's not supposed to be destroyed being destroyed. And secretes acid, so hydrogen ions, that dissolves the bone minerals. Okay, and then we have lysosomal enzymes digest the organic matrix. Okay. When this happens, the minerals that are then freed up, so free minerals, will go to the blood. Okay, this is going to be important because one of the big functions of bone is that they are going to store a lot of calcium. And so if we need calcium in our bodies, which we need constantly calcium in different places, we need to be able to free it up. And so osteoclasts will be able to degrade it, and then those minerals can go back into the blood and then go to wherever it's needed. Okay, when resorption is complete, osteoclasts will go through apoptosis, which is just programmed cell death. Okay, so when resorption is complete, we have apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. Okay. Now, on the other side of this, so we have bone resorption. Now we have to have bone deposition, which is going to be depositing bone. Okay, and osteoblasts are going to do this. So we have bone deposition. Okay, so osteoblasts are going to do this. They are going to create the new bone matrix. What happens is they start to secrete an osteoid and our osteoid matrix. Osteoid matrix. And what happens is it forms this seam of kind of unmineralized. Okay, so again, this is like the first step of your putting down the bone matrix, but it's unmineralized. So it's going to be different from the bone that's around there that has been mineralized. And so we have this unmineralized band of bone matrix. Okay, and so now we're going to kind of talk about, well, how do we actually get the calcium and the phosphate to come in here and kind of calcify this? Okay, so it's separated from the other calcified bone. And so this, we kind of have a terminology for this. So there's a transition zone called the calcification front. Okay, and what happens is that the calcification front is going to be the location of where we're going to start having this calcification happening. So this is how it happens. Okay, so the osteoid becomes calcified through the stimulation of osteoblasts. Okay, and so what this does is it causes the release of matrix vesicles. Oops, did not spell that right. Containing alkaline phosphate. Okay, This then combines with free calcium ions and phosphates. Okay, they form crystals which then gives rise to the bone calcified tissue, okay, which is called hydroxyapatite. Okay, so I wanted to go in a little bit more detail of how this actually is happening. So kind of, all right, so the osteoid proteins that are, proteins that are in the osteoid, they bind calcium ions, okay? So what this does is then in that location where there's osteoid, you're gonna start to have a high concentration of calcium. So it's gonna raise the calcium concentration. And remember, concentration we can write with those brackets. Okay, what that then does is it triggers osteoblasts to release matrix vesicles and these matrix vesicles are studded with the enzyme, alkaline phosphatase, okay? I think I spelled that wrong earlier, so it was supposed to be alkaline phosphatase. What this does is it then, the enzyme cuts phosphates off of the osteoid proteins okay, and that then raises the concentration of phosphate ions, okay? When the calcium and phosphates are high enough, so high enough concentration, we have calcium phosphate crystals form, okay? And then what those crystals do is they kind of act as these seeds that then the hydroxyapatites will actually come surround. Okay, so crystals act as seeds around oxyapatite. Okay. All right. So that's kind of how putting down bone material is going to work. Okay. So what's actually going to control how this all is happening? So there's going to be two major things that are controlling bone remodeling. And there's kind of two purposes of why you want to remodel. Okay. So we're going to say control of remodeling. Okay, so remodeling is going to serve two purposes. The first purpose is that it ensures calcium homeostasis is at what it should be. Okay, so we have to maintain a very specific level of calcium in the blood and in different regions of the bodies so that we can have normal functions. The second is that we need to maintain the strength of the bone. Okay, so the bone has to be maintained, have the correct strength so that we are able to function and move and do all these kind of things. So there are two different ways that this is going to happen that are going to kind of control this. And so hormonal control is going to be one of them. Hormonal control is going to be 1. And then the second one is going to be response to mechanical stress. Okay, and so we'll talk about both of these. All right, so we'll talk about hormonal control first. Okay, and so we have to maintain a specific level of extracellular calcium in order for mainly our nervous system to work correctly. It's also important in muscle contractions. Calcium is really, really important, okay? So the hormone that's going to be involved in all of this is going to be called parathyroid hormone. Okay, and so these are going to be these small little hormone, they're like little, well, let me just draw it. So we have our thyroid, and then we have these little 4 spots kind of this other tissue growth that are going to be the parathyroids. And so they're going to secrete this parathyroid hormone. You can call this PTH, okay? And what PTH does is it stimulates osteoclasts. Stimulates osteoclasts to reabsorb bone, releasing calcium. Okay, so the calcium then can go to the blood and it can do what it needs to do. Okay, another important hormone that's involved in this is going to be calcitriol, and this is going to be something that helps increase calcium absorption in the intestines. Okay, so that will be something that we'll talk about in a different part of the class, but that is also going to be important. Okay, vitamin D is important in this. All right. Okay, so that's the first part, so hormonal control. And so what happens is if you have kind of low levels of, or there's some imbalance. Okay, so let me just remove this so you can't see it through. Okay, so calcium homeostasis, so there should be 9 to 11 milligrams per 100 milliliters of blood. So the calcium needs to be in that approximate area. If it somehow is imbalanced and it is too low, okay, what's going to happen is that we need to then increase our amounts of blood calcium. So what's going to happen is that imbalance is going to send a message to the thyroid and or specifically to the parathyroid glands. The parathyroid glands are going to release parathyroid hormone. So that's going to increase the level of PTH in the body. Osteoclasts, when it comes into contact with that PTH, are going to be activated and will start to degrade bone matrix and release calcium into the blood. Okay, and they will continue to do that until the blood calcium level is correct. Okay, so like we still have a negative feedback loop happening in this situation. Okay, so that would be how parathyroid hormone is going to affect this. And you can have issues with your parathyroid hormone. So you can either have too high levels of calcium in the blood or too low levels of calcium in the blood, and that often will have something to do with the parathyroid hormone by itself. So you can take medications to kind of deal with that. All right, so that's hormonal control of remodeling. Now we have the last type of control of remodeling is going to be response to mechanical stress. Okay, so every time that you're walking, you are exercising, lifting weights, you are putting your bones under stress. And if you do something long enough, your bones will actually start to accommodate that. So individuals that do a lot of weightlifting will have bones that become very thick and very strong in order to withstand kind of the pressure or the stress of having to pick up very heavy weights. So when we're talking about stress, there is a specific law called Wolff's Law, which I imagine is just someone who discovered this, and that's why it's named after them. So Wolff's Law, it states that bone grows or remodels in ways that allow it to withstand the stresses it experiences. Okay? And it's mainly going to be due to factors such as mechanical stress and gravity. Okay, and I think we've talked about gravity before, but when individuals go into space, their bones remodel because they're not being kind of stressed in the same way that they would be if they were on the planet. And so often after astronauts get back onto Earth, they then have to exercise and do other things to help kind of build up that kind of strength in their bones. I know that recently they've done more kind of exercises that the astronauts actually have to do when they're in space to help prevent kind of major issues from happening. Okay, so when we mean stress, we're basically talking about when there is kind of a load put on and weight bearing down on the bone. And it's going to have to do with muscles. Okay, so the muscles will be attached to specific parts of the bone and they will pull on that muscle in order for them to contract. Okay, and so what happens is it tends to kind of bend the bone, and you're going to have, so for example, you're going to have this is the femur, and you're going to have a lot of weight put on the head of the femur, because this is where it kind of connects to the os coxa, and you're going to have all of your upper body weight kind of loaded on this. And so what's going to tend to happen is that there's going to be weight on here, and this is going to tend to want to bend. And so you're going to have this line of compression that's going to happen on this side. On the opposite side of the bone, you're actually going to have a tension line. So instead of being, I can't really do this with this pen, but you're compressing this side, but then you're kind of bending this side over here. And so this is going to have tension where it's kind of pulling this side apart. Okay. And so we have this setup in our bones. And so the bones have to respond in order to make the bones strong enough to withstand this type of bend. Okay. And so what happens is that the bones, specifically long bones, will have the thickest bone at the midway point along the diaphysis. Okay. Because that is where the stress is going to be highest. And so you can't really see the diaphysis, the midpoint down here, but you would then have the thickest bone is going to be in that region. Okay. Now, something interesting about this Wolff's Law is it explains some other things. So when we have, all of us have, or most of us do, handedness. So we're either right-handed or left-handed. And I don't know if you've ever really paid attention much, but normally your dominant hand, so for example, my right hand, which is my dominant hand, is going to be thicker. So for example, like my fingers, I know that some rings I can wear on this hand, but they will not fit on this hand and the same finger because my finger is thicker. And that's because my right hand is going to do a lot of these different actions, and it's going to need to be bigger, thicker, stronger than my left hand, which I'm not very good at using. Like I can't write with my left hand or anything like that. Okay, so that's going to happen. And so basically your dominant hand and dominant arm are going to be thicker. Okay, when you have curved bones, the curved bones are going to be thickest where they're likely to buckle. Okay, and then we've talked about this before, but the trabeculae, where they look like kind of like these very delicate structures, but they are built in a way to withstand high amounts of pressure, and they are going to kind of have the trusses and struts along the lines of compression. So they're going to line up in the way that will make the bone strongest. Okay. One thing that we'll be talking about these different structures on bones, but large bony projections. So we have bony projections. So these big structures, those are often going to be where we have very heavy, strong, active muscles that are going to attach. So we have to have a very large bony projection to help withstand the stress that that muscle will put the bone under. Okay? Now, the interesting thing about all of this is, how does the bone actually know that the mechanical stress is being put on it and how to grow differently? Okay, and so this is what we'll talk a little bit about this. So mechanical stress communication. Okay. So when bone is deformed, so has weight loaded on it, the deforming bone pushes fluid containing ions through the caniculi. Those really little tiny connections between cells. Okay, this creates an electrical current. Okay, and the osteocytes can detect this. Okay, when they do that, they release chemical messengers. And what that does is they promote the formation of additional bone. Okay, now this electrical current has an interesting implication. So one thing that they've started to do with certain breaks, when you break your bones, is that they will apply certain devices that have electrical currents, and they believe that the electrical currents actually help bones heal quicker, because it kind of makes it so these osteocytes are detecting that there's a problem, and they're going to then send out and kind of promote the formation of additional bone. Okay, so kind of in summary of bone remodeling. Okay, so the main thing, okay, so hormones, hormonal control, or controls, determine whether and when remodeling occurs. And then mechanical stress determines where remodeling occurs. Okay.